Hey guys, tonight we stumble into the candlelit chaos of a medieval banquet, a world where your cutlery choices are political, where a poorly timed sip could get you shunned, and where the bread on your plate may very well have more social standing than you do. Imagine it's dusk. Torches flicker along the muddy courtyard. The stone walls echo with pipe music and the clatter of hooves. You're led awkwardly into the manor hall, your boots caked in honest road grime, your best tunic freshly brushed. You think you're prepared. You've read about courtly etiquette, tried to memorize the order of courses. You even practiced bowing in your chamber mirror until your knees creaked. But none of that matters now, because you're already making your first mistake. You're too clean. Not just presentable clean, suspiciously clean. You've washed your hands with scented water from the guest basin, combed your hair into something vaguely symmetrical, and, heaven help you, you dabbed your wrists with rose vinegar. To you, this smells like effort. To everyone else in the hall, it smells like treachery. A nearby steward narrows his eyes as he sniffs the air. A few knights glance at you over their trenchers. One monk coughs politely and scoots away. A lady at the high table frowns into her goblet. You are, quite literally, out of step with the social scent. In the medieval mindset, excessive cleanliness was not a virtue. It was either a cover-up for disease or witchcraft, a sign of foreign influence, Romans bathed, and look what happened to them. Or worst of all, a way of showing up your host. After all, if you arrive cleaner than the lord of the manor, what exactly are you implying? That he should have changed his socks? That his household stinks of goat? Historians still argue whether guests were expected to bathe at all before such feasts. Some records indicate a perfumed hand rinse at the door. Others suggest a light sprinkle of rose water over the shoulders to freshen the soul. But anything more than that risks crossing into "you think you're better than us" territory. And then there's your face. You've arrived glowing, bright-eyed. You've moisturized with almond oil. Maybe even dusted a little chalk on your cheeks for that courtly glow. Unfortunately, you now resemble either a plague victim or a Norman spy. Possibly both. A page boy scurries past, muttering something in Latin that sounds suspiciously like unholy dew. Someone sneezes and looks at you like you caused it. Congratulations. You've already lost the room, and you haven't even sat down yet. You try to recover, you smile, nod politely, say something innocuous about the weather. The weather is never innocuous. A nearby knight leans in. You say it's warm for October, he asks. You nod. Too warm, perhaps. Now you've done it, because in medieval times, the weather wasn't just idle chatter. It was an omen, a sign, sometimes even a divine verdict. If it's unseasonably warm, someone's to blame. And with your suspiciously clean fingernails and herb-scented sleeves, you've just made yourself the prime suspect. You pivot. Of course, the warmth is surely a blessing, you add, trying to sound cheerful. He narrows his eyes. Or a test. There's no winning this conversation. You shuffle away and find yourself near the hearth. It's roaring, roasting joints of meat, bubbling pots of pottage, and a suspiciously still hair. You're hoping the heat might help you blend in, dry out your traitorous freshness. That's when you hear it. The three trumpet notes. Ta-da-da. Dinner is about to begin, and you are nowhere near ready. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Bonus points if you're wearing a hat. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The crowd begins to move, flowing toward the long tables like a flood of wool, linen, and social hierarchy. You follow, hoping to blend. You clutch your invitation parchment with trembling fingers. One of the servants points you toward the lower end of the hall. You nod. Lower is fine, safer, fewer rules, or so you think. As you move to your place, you pass a row of noblemen and ladies, each festooned with embroidery, chainmail, feathers, and expressions that suggest they've memorized every seating chart since Charlemagne. You smile at one who looks vaguely tolerant. She does not smile back. At your seat, a wooden stool beside a trench dug into the table and lined with stale bread. You pause. You don't sit yet. You've been warned about sitting too soon. But you also can't just stand there like a confused statue. You hover. A servant carrying a roasted goose brushes past you. The smell is intoxicating, but you keep your hands clasped. No touching before grace. No reaching. No spontaneous joy. You try to breathe through your mouth so you don't inhale too hard and be accused of sniffing the Lord's fowl. Eventually, you find your moment. A nod from a steward, a shuffle of chairs. The signal is given. You sit and immediately realize the bench is angled. The bread trench crumbles slightly under your elbow, and someone behind you has just begun humming something that sounds suspiciously like a curse. You've made it to the table. You are still alive, but it's only the beginning. You haven't even tasted anything yet, and already you've committed a sin. You sat too soon, or too slowly, or slightly off-center. It's unclear which. But the man to your left, a rotund gentleman whose belt buckle bears the crest of something knightly, just made a barely audible teask, and in the medieval banquet food chain, a teask is one step below an open accusation of sorcery. You steady yourself. A servant places a slab of coarse bread, your trencher, in front of you, hollowed in the middle like a shallow bowl. It's stale by design, meant to soak up broth and protect the table from your clumsy peasant fingers. You murmur your thanks. The servant ignores you. That's the custom. If they acknowledged your words, they'd be violating the rigid hierarchy. You could also be mistaken for flirting, and that never ends well. Now comes the seating. You watch with a kind of medieval horror movie fascination as people begin claiming their spots. And this is where everything goes from uncomfortable to life-threatening. Because you, innocent that you are, have misread the parchment. You're supposed to be down the table, as in several feet further away from the host. You, in your eagerness not to seem out of place, have planted yourself 2 seats higher than you're allowed. You're now sitting in the equivalent of someone else's parking space. If the space was reserved for their family crest and intergenerational honor. The rotund man speaks, low and sharp. That's Sir Ulrich's seat. You blink. Sir Ulrich isn't here. He snorts. Not yet. Behind you, you hear the distinct jangle of spurs and the creak of someone who owns too much leather armor for their own emotional safety. You glance back. Sir Ulrich has arrived. He is exactly as fearsome as his name suggests, balding in that way that makes him angrier, with jowls like underripe apples and eyes like someone who spent too many afternoons jousting his cousins. He sees you, sees his chair, sees you in his chair. Medieval banquets were less about food and more about placement. Where you sat determined your status. It wasn't alphabetical. It wasn't by RSVP timestamp. It was an intricate web of lineage, titles, personal grudges, and how favorably your great-grandfather had spoken of the host cousin during a tax rebellion. To sit too high was to imply you belonged there, a declaration of power. And the thing about medieval declarations of power is, they tend to end badly for the declarer. Historians still argue whether seating errors were sometimes deliberate power plays or simply the result of poor lighting and overlong guest lists. One abbot reportedly sparked a 4-year land dispute after sitting one seat too high at a bishop's funeral feast. The land has still not been returned. You try to stand, you try to apologize, but Sir Ulrich is already in motion. He doesn't shout, he doesn't make a scene. That would be uncouth. He merely looms. You sidestep, trip slightly, knock your cup into your trencher. It spills with an audible plorp. Everyone hears it. You are now, in the span of 20 seconds, both a seat thief and a broth spiller. You might as well spit on the king's crest and insult a goose. Sir Ulrich sits. The table creaks in protest. You slink 3 seats down. No one says a word. But they don't have to. From this new position, you are close to the musicians. Too close. You can see the veins in the lute player's forehead. One of the pipes is out of tune. It wheezes. You are now seated beside a woman who has not blinked since you sat. Her hat is shaped like a chapel roof. Her fingers rest lightly on a spoon that looks ceremonial. You avoid eye contact. At least the bread smells nice. You attempt to smile. A steward passes by and offers a wash basin. You rinse your hands and nod. This is correct. This is safe. This is one of the few sanctioned moments where you're expected to be clean, but only in the hands, and only in public. If you were seen washing before this moment, you'd be called a sorcerer. If you refuse now, you're unhygienic. You're threading a needle made of wet twine. The first course is carried in: soups, stews, bits of fish in sauces of questionable thickness. The scents are divine. Your stomach, long past nervous, now makes a decision of its own. It growls, loudly. The chapel hat woman flinches, not at the sound, but at the vulgarity of it. You cough lightly, as if that might undo it. The servers begin pouring wine into shared goblets, not individual ones. You will be drinking from the same cup as others. This is normal. It's expected. It's deeply troubling. You now must master the medieval drinking rhythm. Sip quickly, wipe subtly, pass gracefully. Too fast and you're greedy. Too slow and you're possessive. Wipe too boldly and you insult the next guest's constitution. Don't wipe at all. Barbarian, you do your best. Your hands tremble slightly. You're already planning your escape. But the bread is warm now. Someone across the table smiles at you faintly. The music isn't quite as sharp. For a moment you think you might make it. Then the second course arrives, and it includes a duck. A whole duck. Garnished with citrus, glazed with something suspiciously reflective, and topped with a decorative wreath of rosemary. It is magnificent. It is also meant for someone else. You don't know this until your fingers twitch toward the plate and someone 3 seats away clears their throat in a tone that sounds like a bishop entering judgment. You withdraw your hand like you've touched boiling pitch. The duck remains untouched. You're learning. Slowly. You will not touch food again until someone, anointed by table hierarchy, blesses the act of carving. And even then, it might be poisoned. But more on that later. For now, you've survived another course. The duck, still glistening in a pool of syrupy glaze, sits several seats away, untouched, majestic, silently judging. You dare not look at it directly anymore. You're not even sure what it's garnished with now. It could be rosemary. It could be a cursed herb. Everything at this table has implications. The carver, a man whose tunic looks like it was stitched from the skin of arguments, finally leans forward. He brandishes a knife with the reverence of a priest and begins slicing into the duck. The process is meticulous, almost ceremonial. Each cut is even, silent, and slow. The aroma makes your teeth ache with want, but you do not move, not even a twitch, because you're learning. You've made it this far without being pelted with apples or accused of communing with bread spirits, and you intend to keep it that way. One sliver of duck is offered to the person 2 seats away, another to the chapel hat lady, none to you, not yet. And you know why? Because you've committed another offense. You're still wearing your hat. It hadn't occurred to you in the chaos of seating and social dodging that your feathered cap, meticulously selected for its courtly humility, might be aggressively disrespectful. You glance around. At least half the men have doffed their caps. The women, of course, remain proudly hatted. It's not just expected, but codified. But you're in the hat twilight zone. Your station is unclear. You're a guest, not a noble. A guest, not clergy. And in this slice of the 14th century, unless you're a knight, a widow, or the host, that hat has to go. You remove it, slowly, regretfully, like someone admitting defeat to a goose. Chapel hat gives a small, approving nod. You've slightly recovered, but now you're hatless and duckless. You rest the hat beside your trencher. Too close. And here comes another error. You've placed it next to the bread. The table stills. Not obviously, not all at once. But the woman across from you frowns with an intensity that could reshape stone. A boy next to her, a squire maybe, or an apprentice social assassin, points discreetly and whispers, "You've committed the most quietly heretical act of the night. You have offended the bread. Bread in medieval dining isn't just food. It's sanctified. It's symbolic. It's semi-sentient, if the monks are to be believed. Placing anything next to it, especially a personal garment, yes, even a hat, is tantamount to treason against the table itself." Historians still argue whether the bread's sanctity originated from religious symbolism or simply because it was often used as an edible plate. Either way, the rule is simple. Don't touch it, don't lean over it, and do not let your hat flirt with it. You shift the hat, apologetically. But it's too late. The bread is spiritually bruised. From somewhere down the table, you hear the start of a blessing. Latin words flow like a bubbling brook from the lips of a priest with heavy rings and heavier eyebrows. You bow your head, not too low, not too long, just enough to signal reverence and awareness without looking like you're trying to out-reverent the clergy. You peek. Chapel hat is watching. She tilts her spoon. It's either a warning or an invitation to war. You return your eyes to the duck. It's gone now, or at least redistributed. You've missed it. The priest is seated again. The goblets are full once more, and the next round of platters is arriving. This time it's soup, or possibly broth, or possibly stew that lost confidence halfway through and became soup again. It's in a large wooden bowl at the center of your seating cluster. And here comes the real challenge. You must share. There are no individual portions, not unless you're royalty or have some sort of contagious title. The bowl is for everyone. You must ladle with grace, not too much, not too little, and most importantly, do not spill. The ladle is passed to you. It's heavy, awkward, slightly slippery. You grip it with both hands like it's about to reveal your fortune. You aim for your trencher, miss slightly. The broth splashes, not dramatically, just enough to dampen the corner, enough that it now looks like your bread has wept. There is silence. You mop gently with your linen, not the one on your lap. That's for your hands, not your sleeve. That would be peasant tear. You use the one resting on your shoulder. Correct, barely. You take a cautious sip. It's warm, earthy, full of root vegetables and meat that could be rabbit, could be very confident squirrel. You don't ask. Asking questions implies distrust. You nod politely to no one in particular, and someone refills your cup. Then, like a final test before judgment, you see it. A second spoon, placed beside your trencher, it glints dully in the firelight. It's not yours. You panic. You have taken someone else's spoon, or someone thinks you should share, or worse, someone is testing you. Forks aren't common yet. Knives are personal. But spoons, they're a strange hybrid of utility and ownership. Using the wrong one could imply social ambition, or theft, or that you're from Normandy. You push it away, gently. The spoon clinks. Chapel hat looks alarmed. You pull it back. The spoon scrapes. Chapel hat looks suspicious. You stop moving. Let the spoon be. Pretend you don't see it. Pretend you've never seen a spoon. The music swells again. Someone plucking a lute with fewer fingers than expected. You take a deep breath and look down. Your bread has soaked through. Your trencher has failed. And now your soup is escaping slowly onto the table. Congratulations. You've offended the bread. Again. You stare down at your leaking trencher, panic bubbling beneath your borrowed tunic. The soup has pooled into a small puddle around the base of your cup, creeping steadily toward your neighbor's sleeve. You try to dam the flow discreetly with your napkin. Shoulder linen only, remember? But the bread is too soggy now to support anything more than your regret. Across the table, someone smothers a chuckle. It might be the squire with judgmental eyebrows. Maybe even the lute player. Either way, you've officially transitioned from that person in the wrong seat to the one whose dinner attempted escape. Still, you hold your posture. Because in medieval banquets, posture is everything. Slouch, and you're signaling boredom. Lean too far forward, and you're either ravenous or about to insult someone's ancestry. But, and here's the kicker, rest your elbows on the table, and you're basically accusing the entire room of treachery, which of course you've now done. In your attempt to stop the soup tide, your left elbow has landed squarely, firmly on the table. You realize this only after Chapel hat emits a sound that isn't quite a gasp nor a hiss, but something ancient and disapproving, like a scroll unrolling itself in outrage. You jerk your elbow back as if the wood has burned you. Too late. The movement has been witnessed, and worse, misinterpreted. You've committed what's known in no surviving etiquette manual but every medieval household as elbowing the meat. This particular faux pas, a combination of bad posture and bad timing, implies that you're either impatient for the next course or about to launch into a very loud opinion about hunting laws. Neither is ideal, especially not when the next course is approaching, and it includes boar. Now let's be clear, boar is sacred. In terms of prestige, It ranks somewhere between a knighted pheasant and an actual relic. It's the dish people fight duels over. A roast boar's head is meant to be admired before it's consumed. People compose songs about it. In fact, one troubadour, 3 seats down, is softly humming a ditty called "O Noble Snout." So when the boar's head is carried in on a silver platter, adorned with cloves, rosemary, and a little wreath of sugared apples where its eyes used to be, everyone stands, even you, but too fast. You knock over your cup, again. This time it splashes against the sleeve of the man next to you. He's large, red-faced, and armed with a spoon the size of a ladle. He pauses, looks down at the stain, then at you. You offer a strained smile. A tribute to the boar? He doesn't respond. But you sense, deep in your medieval bones, that you will not be borrowing sugar from him in the future. The boar is placed at the head of the table. You will not be allowed to touch it, not even with a borrowed spoon. Only the high table receives slices. The rest of you get scraps. Slivers if you're lucky. Broth-soaked sausage ends if you're not. Still you applaud with the rest. You pretend not to notice that Chapel Hat has leaned slightly away from you, probably for her own protection. You wish for a moment you could disappear under the table. But even under the table has rules. That space belongs to the dogs. Big ones, bored ones, occasional noble ones, depending on whose banner they wear. Right now, 2 shaggy hounds are circling the table's edge like furry tax collectors, licking up bread fragments and the dignity of fallen guests. One stops beneath your feet, looks up, growls faintly. You suspect he can smell the soup on your tunic. You drop a bit of your trencher in appeasement. Another mistake, because feeding a dog from the table, unless it's your dog, in your manner, and your servants are pretending not to see, is a violation of the unspoken pact between guest and host. It suggests you're attempting to bribe the animals, or worse, that you value their company more than your hosts, which at this point might be true. Still, you lean back in your chair, not too far, no slouching. You straighten your shoulders, angle your torso, attempt a dignified nod to a passing servant who is carrying a pie the size of a helmet. You're trying to redeem yourself with posture, but posture isn't enough because the utensils have arrived, and among them is a fork. It's small, 2-pronged, ivory-handled. It gleams faintly in the candlelight, and it fills the table with tension. You don't know this, but you're now staring at one of the most suspicious objects in medieval Europe. In the early 14th century, the fork is seen by many as foreign, Byzantine, sinister. Little pitchforks of the devil, some clergy called them. Why stab your food, they asked, when you have fingers? Are your hands not good enough? Is your soul clean enough to avoid the divine finger food model? Historians still argue whether forks were common in noble houses by the 15th century, but one thing's certain, they weren't trusted. So when you reach for the fork, there's a beat of silence. You freeze. Everyone watches. You shift your fingers, slide instead toward your knife. Relieved sighs ripple across the table. Crisis averted, but the fork remains. You ignore it like it's a ghost. The pie is placed before you. It's filled with minced pheasant, fig, and, if your nose is correct, possibly cloves or gilt. You're not sure how to cut into it. The crust seems ornamental, the edges braided. There's a tiny crown baked into the top. Do you slice it, break it, wait? You wait, and you're right to, because across the table someone tries to cut too early and their knife is seized, quietly, firmly, by a steward. Apparently, this particular pie is symbolic. It contains a message, possibly a tiny scroll, possibly a pickled almond arranged to resemble a falcon crest. Either way, it's not for you. You chew your bite of pheasant paste slowly, then too slowly, because now you've committed another offense. You are lingering. The pace of the meal must be observed. Too fast and you're greedy. Too slow and you're holding up the table, making others feel awkward about their own hunger. You nod to yourself. Adjust your tempo. One bite, sip of wine, bite, look upward, sip, nod, repeat. This is the dance, the choreography of not being noticed for the wrong reasons. A steward appears beside you and silently refills your cup. You nearly thank him out loud, but you remember don't. Instead, you smile faintly, dip your head in acknowledgement. The medieval version of thanks, bro. He moves on. The music changes. Someone's lute string snaps. A dog begins to bark rhythmically. You exhale. You've made it through the soup, the posture gauntlet, the boar and the fork. You are still seated, still breathing, still entirely hatless. And the fish course hasn't even arrived yet. It starts with a smell, briny, faintly sweet, and undeniably fishy. The kind of scent that could either mean you're in for a delightful course of fresh-caught river fare, or you've stumbled into a barrel someone forgot to empty last fortnight. But this is the fish course, and like everything else at a medieval banquet, it carries more political weight than flavor. The servants file in like a parade of damp ghosts, each bearing a wooden tray laden with platters of herring, eel, trout, and something pale that could be cod or could be ambition. Each fish is arranged with alarming precision, nestled among herbs, surrounded by lemon-like fruits, imported at terrifying cost, and dusted with what might be sugar or might be powdered smugness. You steel yourself. You've survived soup. You've dodged the wrath of an offended boar. Now it's time to face the fish. Your platter is laid before you. A single portion of pickled herring, its little eye gazing upward like it knows your sins. You do not reach for it. You wait. You watch. Across the table, Sir Ulrich is already chewing. Not fish. He never eats fish. It's a known thing. A political stance. Something about herring alliances and old blood feuds with coastal lords. He eats only the bread. You've read about this. Refusing the fish isn't just about taste, it's about sides. In some parts of medieval Europe, accepting the fish course means you support the current tax code. Declining it suggests you think the clergy have too much influence. In certain courts, eating eel marks you as a royalist. Eating carp? A merchant sympathizer. Refusing it entirely? You're either a heretic or you're from Italy, possibly both. Historians still argue whether fish feuds actually change politics. But one thing's certain, more than one treaty was drafted with trout grease on the parchment. You glance toward Chapel Hat. She has taken a delicate bite, eyes downcast as though consuming the soul of a saint. A nobleman further down the table is making a point of rejecting his dish, pushing it away with the back of his knife like it might bite him. So, what do? You opt for neutral chewing. You cut a small piece. Avoid the spine. Chew twice. Swallow. No facial expression. No sigh. No eye contact. Just a blank slate of digestion. You are the Switzerland of seafood. No one reacts. A success until you sneeze. Not dramatically, not even wetly, just a sharp, involuntary burst of air. but it happens right after you chew. And that, dear listener, is an invitation to speculation. Someone across the table tilts their head. The squire with the permanent smirk raises an eyebrow. The question is unspoken but clear. Was that a sneeze of distaste, a signal, or poison? Because yes, poison is always on the table at these things. Not in the casual modern way, where food poisoning is an accident from expired clams. In the medieval world, poisoning was a sport, a whisper, an entire branch of social warfare. That's why many nobles brought their own food tasters, or tasted only from the left side of the plate, or waited until their neighbor chewed first. And sneezing? Sneezing is suspicious. It means herbs, spices, possible sabotage. You quickly dab your nose with the correct linen, shoulder not lap. You nod once to no one in particular. What a charming fish nod. Not too enthusiastic, not smug. No one draws a dagger. You live to dine another minute. The next dish arrives as if the universe has decided to test your nerves. A platter of stuffed lamprey. It looks like an eel dressed for a wedding it didn't want to attend. Ringed in breadcrumbs, stuffed with minced herbs, possibly cloves. Its mouth, a circular nightmare of nature, has been sewed shut with a decorative ribbon. You are not expected to eat this. You are expected to admire it. There is a difference. The lamprey is a centerpiece. It says something about the host's wealth, his access to river rights, and his relationship with someone called Count Arnaud, whom no one seems to like. There's a brief moment of applause as the ribbon is cut. The lamprey is then paraded around the table like a sweaty mascot. You clap, of course, enthusiastically, just the right amount. You even feign wonder, and then the moment is shattered by the arrival of a golden salt cellar. This, too, is not merely functional. It is a test. Salt in the medieval era is not just for seasoning. It is currency, a symbol, a divine substance. The phrase above the salt comes from here. Those seated closer to the salt are important. Those seated farther, you. But now the cellar is placed within your reach. A servant has made a mistake, or someone is testing you. Do you use it? Reach for it? You glance again at Chapel Hat. She has frozen, watching. You do not reach. Instead, you scoot the salt slightly to the right, not toward yourself, but toward the man who glared at your soup earlier. He blinks, nods once. You've made a friend, or at least, you've made someone briefly less hostile. The fish bones begin piling up on the side of your trencher. You arrange them neatly, not in a stack. That suggests you're counting. Not scattered, that's uncouth, just parallel enough to show restraint. Then someone near the head of the table calls out, "Would the guests like the cheeks?" The cheeks of the fish, the most tender, delicate part. A rare honor. You smile tightly, nod. You think this is a compliment. Then the cheek arrives. It's the size of a coin and looks like something someone should have left in the river. Still, you eat it, carefully, as if it's your destiny. And then you hear it, a fork, scraping a plate. Not yours, not even near you. But the sound reverberates like a threat. Someone has used their fork, improperly. A steward arrives. The fork vanishes. The guest, it was the squire, is now sans utensil and visibly shaken. You sip your wine, slowly, respectfully. Avoid eye contact. The fish course winds down. Platters are cleared. Linen is refreshed. Someone plays a lute that has slightly retuned itself to despair. You exhale. You've eaten the herring, respected the lamprey, dodged the salt trap, even been offered a cheek. You've survived the most politicized course of the night, and just as your stomach begins to relax, you hear it. Pie music. Pie music. You didn't know that was a thing, but it is. Because now, as the lute player shifts into a chirpy melody and a young boy with bells on his boots begins hopping through the hall, it becomes painfully clear a pie is coming. Not just any pie, a show pie. And you're about to do something horribly, irreversibly wrong with it. The procession begins. Two servants lead the way, bearing candles shaped like pears. Behind them comes the pie, golden crusted, domed like a cathedral, adorned with sugared flowers, and, unmistakably, breathing. Not heavily, not obviously, but just enough to make you question reality. Is there something inside it? You whisper. Chapel Hat doesn't respond, but her eye twitches in a way that means yes, and don't ask questions unless you want to be excommunicated by pastry. The pie is set down reverently on a silver platter. It's enormous, almost theatrical. A decorative crest is etched into the top in burnt sugar, the host's heraldic goose biting a fox's tail. You do not comment on it. You do not laugh. That was last year's scandal. Then the signal comes. A steward lifts the crust gently. Steam bursts forth. So do doves, real ones. 3 of them. They flap violently out of the pie like overcooked secrets and vanish into the rafters. One of them immediately poops on the lute player. No one reacts. You are now expected to clap, not for the birds, not for the pie, but for the symbolism. In medieval banquets, pies weren't just food, they were statements. A pie might contain a fortune-telling token, a love note, a dead fish arranged into the shape of a crown. One disastrous feast reportedly featured a pie filled with live frogs and scented ink, meant to represent fertility and wit. It ended in screams. Tonight's doves, peace and generosity. You applaud as instructed. Then it happens. The pie is sliced. Not by the host, but by you. Because through some cursed alignment of seating order and servant confusion, the platter is passed your way. You are the first to touch the knife. Everyone freezes. You freeze. In medieval etiquette, slicing into the wrong pie could cause literal war. Certain pies were intended only for the high table. Others contained messages meant for specific guests. And then there were ceremonial pies, not meant to be eaten at all, just viewed, praised, and carried away like a relic. You've picked up the knife. You've touched the crust. You are already halfway into offending 3 minor barons, a steward, and possibly the Baker's Guild. You gently lower the knife, smile, say, "Shall we?" The steward snatches the pie and whisks it away, with the grace of a hawk rescuing a nobleman from his own bad ideas. Crisis averted, barely. The real pie, the edible one, arrives moments later. Smaller, less grand. It contains venison, mushrooms, and a suspiciously sweet red sauce that makes your molars panic. You eat carefully, slowly. Aware now that everything is political. Across the hall, someone butters their bread. A gasp. Butter at this point in the feast is not allowed. It's Lent adjacent. Or maybe it's part of a regional rivalry. Or perhaps the butter was meant for a cheese course that hasn't arrived yet. The point is, that guest has breached the sequence. You pretend not to notice. The butterer is quietly escorted out. Your own bite of pie is successful until you make the mistake of comparing it. "Oh," you murmur to Chapel Hat, "tastes like the one we had at..." She stops chewing. You realize your error. You've invoked another banquet. Worse, a rival banquet. Now it sounds as if you're ranking your host's pastry against that of Lord Whoever. This is a social duel you didn't mean to start. You pivot. Though this one's far more balanced, that other one, too much sage. She blinks, continues chewing. You're safe. For now. Another pie arrives, a dessert one this time. Pears, walnuts, possibly a prune hiding in the shadows. You do not reach for the knife. Instead, you let someone else cut first. An older gentleman with hands so steady they probably judge knife contests at fairs. You're learning. You eat just 2 bites. Too much dessert shows gluttony. Too little? Ingratitude. You stop at 2. You feel a little hungry. That's correct. That's respectable hunger. And then, just as you relax, someone burps. Loudly, you look up. It's the squire, again. The room pauses. The sound echoes like a herald of doom, but no one reacts. Because of course, in some medieval circles, burping is a compliment. It means satisfaction. It means the cook has pleased the body and soul. In others, however, it's deeply inappropriate, bordering on devilry. Which tradition is this? You hold your breath. The host chuckles, raises his goblet. Everyone drinks. You drink. The squire drinks. The pie is eaten. Peace remains. You lean back in your chair, not too far, and exhale. You've dodged a dovenato, passed on pastry politics, and kept your fingers out of symbolic pies. But the feast isn't over, because now comes the entertainment. And entertainment in medieval times is just another word for a trap. The candles have burned low. The air now tastes of nutmeg, grease, and fading tension. You think you've made it. You've eaten in rhythm. You've survived soup, fish, and forbidden pastry. You've offended no clergy, no poultry, and, crucially, no bread in the past 20 minutes. But now comes the most unpredictable course of all, entertainment. The lute player, who has clearly recovered from his earlier dove-based incident, clears his throat with theatrical flair. At the far end of the hall, the servants roll back a large woolen tapestry, revealing a small dais. Upon it, a chair, a stool, and a man already wearing a hat that looks like it's in the process of telling a joke. A hush descends. This is the fool. And unlike modern entertainers, a medieval fool isn't just a jester in bells. He's a professional risk-taker, a licensed boundary pusher, and, more dangerously, a mirror. He reflects the absurdities of the room back at their owners, usually with rhyme, sometimes with alarming accuracy. You try to look uninteresting. He begins his performance with a poem about poultry. So far, so good. Then he moves to mimicry. He becomes the roast boar. Then the soup. Then, oh no, the Duchess from the head table. People laugh. She laughs too, but her laugh sounds like cold armor. You don't laugh. You're not sure when to laugh. Because here's the cruel rule of banquet entertainment. Laughter is political. Laugh too loudly at a jab and you're siding with the fool. Laugh too softly and you might be perceived as disapproving of the host's generosity. Laugh at the wrong time? That's a declaration of allegiance to the target of the joke. Worse still, the fool sees everything. He locks eyes with you. Number no, no, no. He walks, no, dances, down the length of the table, trailing ribbons and metaphors. He points at your hatless head. What noble scalp appears so bright? Did feathers flee in fright last night? The room chuckles, lightly, testing the waters. You smile, barely. He squints. No shame in baldness? None at all. The cook's got less upon his skull. Now it's safe to laugh. The crowd laughs louder. You join them, relieved. But he's not finished. He turns to Sir Ulrich. The joke that follows cannot be repeated here. But let's just say it involves venison, false teeth, and an uncomfortably specific horse. There is a beat of silence, then a roar of laughter. Even Ulrich laughs. Somehow, terrifyingly. The fool spins, bows, and leaps onto the stool. A trained dog joins him. The dog wears boots. People applaud as though this is normal. You do too. You don't ask questions anymore. The dog bows. The fool juggles apples. The apples are thrown into the air with such exaggerated ceremony that you suspect one of them was previously part of the centerpiece. And then it happens. The fool makes a joke in Latin. Half the room nods thoughtfully. The other half, including you, freezes. You did not go to monk school. You have no idea what was just said. Was it a reference to Cicero? A double entendre? A veiled insult aimed at the bishop? You glance at Chapel Hat. She raises one brow. That's it. Just one. It tells you nothing. You decide to smile, then pause. No, don't smile yet. You wait to see what the high table does. The Duchess smirks. You smirk. 2 seconds later, people laugh. You time your chuckle exactly in sync with a nearby knight. Safe. Historians still argue about the role of humor in medieval feasts. Some believe jesters were allowed to critique society under a layer of theatrical nonsense. Others argue the fool was just a social buffer, absorbing the crowd's discomfort before anyone reached for a dagger. Tonight, your fool is treading a fine line. He finishes with a monologue about wine, which turns into a drinking song that makes at least 3 stewards blush. You pretend to understand the chorus. It involves clapping, stomping, and miming what you hope is a chicken and not a veiled insult toward the Duke's mistress. Then come the riddles. A servant places a carved wooden box at the center of the table. Inside, slips of parchment, each with a riddle, to be drawn and answered aloud. The box moves around. You watch in dread as it inches closer. A noblewoman draws a riddle about cabbages. She solves it with ease. Another riddle, this one about clouds and sheep, is passed to the bishop. He frowns, thinks, then mutters an answer. Applause. And now, it's in front of you. You draw, unroll, read. What has no tongue but tells the truth? No lips, but brings both joy and ruth. You blink. The table waits. You sweat. You think it's a riddle about music, scrolls, geese. Chapel Hat whispers, say a bell. You trust her. You answer, a bell. Applause. You live another day. The fool claps. Wise guest. Let's hope that brain don't stew in jest. You bow slightly. Don't get cocky. The entertainment winds down. The fool bows so low his hat touches his toes. The dog eats the last apple. The lute player attempts one final tune before his string gives out again in protest. And then, just when you think you can exhale, a man in a tall crimson cap begins telling a story. You groan inside, because now comes the part of the evening where you must listen intently. You cannot nod off. You cannot fidget. You must react at the correct moments. Smile at romance, sigh at tragedy, blink rapidly at allegory. The story is about a knight, a goose, a betrayal, possibly France. You do your best. You gasp when everyone gasps. You nod thoughtfully during the political metaphor. You do not laugh when the knight is tricked by a goose into marrying a donkey. That's apparently symbolic. Eventually, the storyteller sits. People clap. Someone cries. You manage to remain upright and conscious. The candles are shorter now. The air is full of sighs. The host rises. A servant rings a tiny bell. You think it's over. But no. The host smiles and says 5 words that make your spine tingle. Now for the final course. Now for the final course. Those words drift through the hall like a cold breeze under a cathedral door. You straighten instinctively, your knees creaking like the floorboards of an old chapel, because you know this is not simply dessert. This is a test. The final course of a medieval banquet isn't about flavor. It's not even really about food. It's a ritual, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence you barely understood. And like any sacred rite, if you misstep, even slightly, it reflects upon your soul. The servants reappear, this time moving slower, reverently, as if they are carrying relics instead of cream tarts and candied nuts. Silver dishes clink gently, trays of dried fruit, wheels of cheese, honeycomb, preserved quince. Everything is smaller now, daintier, but somehow heavier with expectation. The cheese arrives at your end of the table first. That's unusual. Chapel Hat notices. So does Sir Ulrich. You try not to react, but the weight of the moment presses into your spine like an iron goblet. Because in many medieval courts, cheese is never served before dessert, and sometimes it's not served at all unless the moon is waxing, the tide is out, and the host's favorite cow isn't unwell. You stare at the cheese. It stares back. A wedge of something soft and pale with a slight green hue at the edge. Either intentional or terrible oversight. You glance down the table. No one else has touched theirs. You keep your hands still. Another servant arrives, this one holding a carved pear. Not a pear carved into a rose. This is a real pear, but it has been intricately carved with a tiny knife into the shape of a lion. He places it before you. No one else receives one. You blink. Smile faintly. But the smile says, "Please let this be a mistake. It's not." This is the favor portion of the meal, a dangerous game of subtle alliances. Sometimes a host honors a guest with a token of appreciation, a pie shaped like their house crest, a fruit carved with hidden symbols, a cup of spice wine served slightly warmer than the others. To refuse the token is to insult the giver. To accept it without acknowledgement is to seem ungrateful. To praise it too loudly is to seem boastful. You are now holding a carved lion pear, and everyone is watching. You nod. Once. Deliberate. Low. The host catches your eye, smiles, then looks away. You've done it. Chapel Hat even gives you a slight twitch of approval. Or indigestion. Hard to say. The cheese is passed on, untouched. You survive. Then a servant bearing a long tray passes behind you and offers something wrapped in gold leaf. Your seatmate accepts it with a flourish, unwraps it slowly to reveal what looks like a walnut rolled in candied petals. You receive one too. You are about to eat it when you notice something. Everyone else is waiting, and now the host raises his goblet. You freeze. Because, of course, this is the toast. The final course is traditionally accompanied by a toast. It may be to the health of the king, the future of the crops, the soul of the departed cat who kept the wine cellar free of mice. It doesn't matter. The point is, you don't eat before the toast. You wait, you listen. The host speaks. To peace, to plenty, to guests who know their place. Ah, subtle. The goblets raise. You raise yours, careful not to be too eager. You don't want to clang glasses with someone too far above you and spark a social inquisition. You sip. The spiced wine burns sweetly down your throat, thick with clove, honey, and a suggestion of regret. You nibble the candied walnut. It tastes like the floor of a perfumery. You smile anyway. More dishes appear now, dainty ones, slivered almonds, sweetened hazelnuts, little biscuits folded into knots. Some are flavored with rose water, which you remember they think is virtuous and medicinal, even though it tastes like regret-made syrup. And then, just when your mouth begins to recover, comes the marzipan. Not just any marzipan. This marzipan has been sculpted. It is a tiny church complete with sugar glass windows and almond paste gargoyles. You are terrified to touch it. Someone beside you takes theirs and snaps off the roof first. That seems wrong. You opt to remove the nave with your pinky? That seems worse, but you commit. You chew thoughtfully, as if consuming theology. And still, the feast continues. The final test arrives on a small gilded tray. It's called a dragée, a sugar-coated spice, usually meant to aid digestion, sometimes meant to mask poison, and occasionally used to deliver messages. One ill-fated baron once bit into one and found a marriage proposal. He accepted. The woman never forgave him. You pop the dragée in your mouth. It is anise. Your body rejects it, but your face must not. You smile through clenched molars. Beside you, someone spits theirs into a napkin. You've won this round. Then comes the hand-washing ceremony. A servant appears with a basin and a ewer of water infused with lavender. You extend your hands over the bowl. He pours gently. You do not splash. You do not speak. You accept the linen towel without making eye contact. Anything more would be social overreach. Clean hands, dry mouth, upright posture. You're a picture of medieval grace. The host rises again. He announces that the feast has concluded. You do not clap. You bow your head. Everyone begins to stand. And now, here, at the finish line, you risk it all, because you're about to stand too early. Someone else behind you is slower. You rise. Your chair scrapes the floor. Half the table turns to look. You sit back down. Then carefully, slowly, as if standing from the grave, you rise again. This time, in harmony. The banquet is over. But the social dissection will last for days. Who reached first? Who laughed too loud? Who elbowed the boar? Who forgot the final blessing? And who, dear guest, was handed a lion-shaped pear? You. You were. And now, after hours of navigating rituals, riddles, riddled pastries, symbolic cheeses, and weaponized humor, you step into the cold night air. Your legs are stiff. Your fingers still smell of cloves. A dove lands somewhere on a parapet above you and coos in judgment. But you made it. Almost. Because you forgot one thing. And tomorrow morning, the household staff will remember. And they will talk. You wake in a linen-wrapped panic. The candle has long burned out. The coals in your hearth are dark and sulking. And the dim gray light leaking through the shutters tells you morning has arrived. Your feet are numb. Your head aches. Not from wine, but from something far worse. Memory. You forgot the leftovers rites. It hits you like a dropped trencher. That moment, in the quiet after the feast, when the tables were cleared and the servants began collecting what remained. Scraps, bones, half-eaten pears, crusty bits of pottage. And every guest was expected to perform the ritual of redistribution. But you didn't. You stood. You bowed. You nodded to the host. You carefully folded your napkin, which you weren't supposed to fold. And then you left. You abandoned your scraps. And in the etiquette labyrinth of medieval banquets, that's not just impolite, that's an omen. See, food in this era wasn't just nourishment. It was order, hierarchy, divine choreography. And every leftover had a designated fate. Trenchers were to be gathered for the poor. Bones were to be reserved for the dogs, or the tallow pot. Fruit rinds went to compost, unless they had been kissed by spice, in which case they went to the apothecary. And your marzipan church? That should have been broken and shared with the children of the household, preferably while reciting a psalm. You did none of this. You left your church whole, a silent almond cathedral of ungratefulness. The staff noticed, the kitchen noticed, and now you're waking up to a day that will be soaked in gossip. Not from nobles. Nobles forget quickly. But the cooks, the stewards, the boy who scrubs the hall tiles with sour ale and a rabbit pelt, they remember everything, and they talk. You wrap yourself in a wool cloak and step into the corridor. A servant passes you with a tray of cider and a look that could curdle milk. You nod. He does not nod back. You descend the stairs. At the foot of the main hall, the table is being reset, candles replaced, linens starched. You spot your seat from the night before. There, beside it, the remains of your untouched lion pair, now wilted and sagging like a disappointed tutor. Chapel Hat is already seated in a side alcove, breaking her fast with barley bread and dried plums. She sees you, raises an eyebrow. I see the lion lost its roar, she says. You smile thinly. I meant to share it, she shrugs. Intentions don't steep tea. Across the room you overhear a steward whispering to another. Left his trencher like it was a sacred text. Didn't even scrape it. Didn't even nod at the dogs. They wait for the scraps, you know. Bet he folds his napkin when no one's looking. You do. You absolutely do. You thought you were in the clear, but you've become that guest, the one who thinks dinner ends when the candles burn out. In truth, the medieval banquet never really ends until the food has been honored, redistributed, and cleansed. And by neglecting the rites, you've placed yourself in the category of people who don't know how to complete a cycle. That's worse than being rude. It's being improperly closed. Historians still debate the deeper significance of these rituals. Some say they were rooted in early Christian ideas of charity and stewardship. Others suggest it was pure practicality. Nothing wasted, everything used. But among the household staff, it was a matter of spiritual hygiene. Food that wasn't shared became spiritually stale. Leftovers unattended became cursed. Yes, cursed. You've heard tales, some silly, some not, of guests who left their crusts unoffered and woke the next day with nosebleeds. Or sudden infestations of weevils in their travel bags. One knight claimed he lost a toe after refusing to scrape his trencher for the pigs. Is it superstition? Absolutely. Are you willing to risk it? Not even a little. You hurry back to the table. Your seat is gone, but your trencher remains. The bread is stiff. The marrow-smeared crust has gone dry around the edges. Still, you kneel beside it like it's a shrine. A passing kitchen maid stops. You look up. I forgot the rites, you whisper. She pauses. You did. Can I make amends? She squints, then nods toward a clay jar by the door. Scraps go to the dog yard. Bread ends to the barrel. Bones, if you saved any, go to the broth pot. You rise, scrape your trencher into the proper bins. There's not much left, but it's the gesture that counts. When you're done, you offer the lion pair to the boy polishing goblets. For your trouble, he beams, I'll show it to my sister. She loves cats. Close enough. You feel a little better. Then from the shadows, the fool reappears. He's not juggling now, just peeling an apple with a knife that's way too sharp for a man dressed in bells. Forgot the food rites, did you? He murmurs. You nod. He leans in. Next time, leave a crust for the mice. They tell good stories. You nod again. Slowly, the fool vanishes. You returned to your chamber, lighter somehow. You performed your penance. You gave your lion away. You honored the trenchers. You remembered at last the quiet, invisible people that make the feast happen long after the laughter fades. And now you know. The banquet doesn't end when the host retires. It ends when the dogs are full, when the bread has crumbled, when the staff stops whispering. You lie back on your straw mattress. Let your limbs sink into the scratchy wool. Outside, a dove coos from the window ledge. You close your eyes, but you leave a biscuit on the sill, just in case. Your second day in the manor begins with a whisper and a slap of cold water. Not to the face, this isn't that kind of story, but to your pride. Because word has gotten around. You, dear guest, are now known, not for your knowledge of courtly riddles, not for your impeccable elbow control. You are known as the one who folded the napkin and abandoned the trencher. The kitchen gossips sing your tale like it's a folk ballad. A boy in the stables tries to mimic your toast posture, over-dramatic and a little limp. One of the dairymaids bows mockingly when you pass. You have become a cautionary tale, and tonight you have been invited to another banquet, a smaller one, quieter, less flashy, but no less dangerous, because this time it's a noble family's private table. Forget the great hall, forget the pageantry. This is the inner sanctum, a side chamber with fewer guests, lower ceilings, and a higher concentration of judgment per square foot. You enter in your cleanest tunic, with your chin level and your hands freshly scented with mint. Not too much mint, though. You've learned. The room is cozy, stone walls draped with tapestries, a low fire crackling, and a table that could seat 8, but only 6 chairs are set. Your name is scratched, gently, tastefully, into a piece of oiled parchment folded beside your trencher. You take your seat last. That's correct. Chapel Hat is here again, now wearing something looser, more casual. Her hat tonight is shaped like a crescent moon. It says, "I'm observing, not I'm judging." She nods at you. The host, a viscount with the coloring of an aged turnip and the gaze of a bored hawk, welcomes everyone with a single word: eat. No prayers, no announcements, just permission. And suddenly everyone's moving. Plates arrive fast. Everything is smaller here. Personal trenchers, 1 goblet each. The food is more refined. Quail legs, pear slices, a soft white cheese that smells faintly of ambition. This is a social test disguised as supper, because in small banquets, the rules change. You're not just a body in a chair anymore. You're a conversational obligation. If you don't speak, you seem aloof. If you speak too much, you seem arrogant. If you make a joke that doesn't land, you might be asked to leave before the eggs. You take a sip of your wine, light, floral, not poison. Then the viscount turns to you. "Tell us," he says, "what's the worst thing you've ever seen at table?" You freeze. The table stills. This is a game. They want you to confess a faux pas. Someone else's. Something outrageous. It must be just scandalous enough to entertain, but not so cruel that you seem vindictive. You clear your throat. "In Bruges," you say, "a merchant once salted a plum before grace." The bishop wept. A beat, laughter, not raucous, just enough. You are safe. Conversation flows again. You learn that the man across from you collects spoons carved into animal shapes. That Chapel Hat once refused a fish course in Navarre because the eyes reminded her of her cousin. That the Viscount despises cloves but tolerates them in desserts because tradition demands suffering. The next course arrives in silence. Eggs poached in almond milk, ringed with violets. You are uncertain, not about the flavor, but the order. Eggs? Now, but no one else hesitates. This is a regional thing. You eat one. It tastes like a flower caught a fever. You smile, not too broadly, and then comes the unexpected. A silver bowl is placed before you. Inside it, one whole apple, skewered with a sprig of rosemary, dusted with powdered sugar. A simple dish. Elegant, but your host says nothing, just watches. This is a personal course, possibly a test. You are meant to know how to eat this. If you slice it wrong, you risk appearing uncultured. If you refuse it, you insult your host's orchard. If you eat it too fast, you suggest you've never seen sugar before. You lift the knife slowly, cut around the core, place the slices neatly to the left. Offer the first slice to your host. He nods once. You've done it. But now Chapel Hat leans in. Tell me, guest, do you eat the seeds? You freeze again. Because this is a game inside a game. Some nobles eat the seeds, believing it shows hardiness. Others avoid them, claiming it's common. No one agrees. You smile. Only if the moon is waxing. A beat. She grins. You've survived again. Dessert is brief. Fig paste rolled in honey. You eat just enough. No one burps. No one laughs. But as the table begins to clear, the Viscount taps his goblet. One more thing, he says. The servants return, bearing tiny scrolls on plates. Each guest receives one. Inside, a single line of verse. Yours reads, "He who folds the bread too fast shall eat alone until the last." A jab? A joke? You can't tell, but you laugh, gently. You nod. Let it pass. Later in the hallway, Chapel Hat catches up to you. That scroll, she says, was from the cook. They still remember. You sigh. What should I do? She shrugs. Bake something. You blink. Bread, pies, anything. Bring it to the kitchen. Offer it without pride. You won't undo it, but you might shift the story. So that's what you do. That night, you find a baker in the village. You need badly. You burn your first crust. The second is better. You bring it back wrapped in cloth and leave it by the kitchen door. No note, no name, just a crust. The next morning, your breakfast bread is slightly warmer. You've begun to redeem yourself. And when Chapel Hat joins you for a walk in the garden, she doesn't speak. She just hands you a sprig of rosemary. You'll survive, she says. Maybe you will. Maybe. By your third banquet, you've learned two things. 1, you can't win. 2, you can absolutely lose. Tonight's feast is hosted by the abbess of a local priory, an event known affectionately and somewhat fearfully among the nobility as the holy night of too many rules. You've been invited as a gesture of goodwill after your apple core diplomacy at the Viscount's table. Apparently, people are curious to see if you'll make it through an ecclesiastical supper without accidentally summoning a minor demon. You arrive early. You now know this is not to be seen as eager, but respectful. You bow to every door. You thank every servant, silently, of course. You bring your own knife this time, and not one you borrowed from a man who later used it to open walnuts. The priory hall is quiet. The table is long but not grand. The food will be modest, but the manners will be merciless. You take your place, low on the seating chart, which is safer. Beside you, an elderly monk folds his napkin into the shape of a cross. Across from you, a widow is reading a psalter while sipping wine through pursed lips, as if she intends to give it a book review. The abbess arrives in silence. Everyone rises. You rise, you bow. You don't scrape your chair. You are learning. The meal begins with broth. You sip slowly, quietly. There's no meat tonight. It's a fasting feast. But that doesn't mean the expectations are any lighter. The main rule: do not talk unless addressed. So of course, the abbess turns to you. Tell me, she says, her voice both kind and bladed. Do guests in your land speak before the second course? You smile. Only if the food is cursed, mother. A pause, she chuckles. The monk beside you smiles faintly. You might have just earned 5 spiritual points. The courses are small: lentils, fish again, a suspiciously gray pudding no one explains. The conversation is sparse until one of the priests at the head of the table clears his throat and begins to read from a scroll. This is scripted entertainment, the religious version. Instead of fools and juggling dogs, you get morality plays and riddles with consequences. The priest finishes his tale, a story about a merchant who hoarded figs and was turned into a cheese, and then looks around the table. We shall now have our round of questions. Your stomach drops like a badly tied pouch of grain. The rules are clear. Each guest is asked a single question. You must answer truthfully, or humbly, or both. It's not meant to trap you, but it does. One monk is asked what he regrets. He says knowing too little Greek. A woman is asked what she fears. She replies, rancid milk and politics. Then the priest turns to you. What is the worst thing you've done at table? You pause, think. Then you say, I once placed my hat next to the bread. There are gasps. One nun crosses herself. The abbess closes her eyes. You add quietly, it has haunted me ever since. Another pause. Then the abbess opens her eyes and says, you may take 2 pears at the end of the meal. Laughter. Gentle, pious laughter. You've done it. You answered with honesty, with a little shame, and with no defense. That is the path to survival here. Because in religious feasting culture, the meal is not just about food, it's about confession by fork. Historians have noted that monasteries and nunneries kept extensive records of meals, menus, guests, who spoke when, and what was said. One abbot in 1327 apparently excommunicated a visiting knight for blessing the wrong fish. These meals weren't just sacred, they were surveillance. You're careful now. You wipe your hands with the assigned cloth, embroidered with the priory's emblem. You take the smaller slice of bread. You sip water between bites. No wine tonight. You begin to crave simplicity, quiet, a meal without traps. But in this hall, even silence is charged with meaning. The final course is, as promised, pears. They arrive in a silver bowl, wrapped in parchment like little gifts. Yours has a thread of red ink across the edge, a sign that it's a favor, a reward. Your answer earned it. You bow your head before eating. It tastes like penance and sugar. As the plates are cleared, the abbess stands. She blesses the meal. She blesses the guests. Then she blesses the chairs. Apparently, the chairs are family heirlooms, carved by monks, each one named. Yours is called Mildred. You pat it gently before leaving. Later in the courtyard, Chapel Hat joins you. You made it, she says, and you didn't even insult the pears. You sigh. I didn't know chairs had names. They don't always, but in that hall, everything has a name and a memory. You ask her what the next banquet might hold. She shrugs. Maybe a duel, maybe a goose, maybe a goose duel. You raise an eyebrow. It's happened, she says, utterly serious, and you believe her, because in the labyrinth of medieval etiquette, nothing is safe. Not your trencher, not your hat, and certainly not your goose. You'd think by now you'd be immune to banquet anxiety, that after surviving cursed fish, hat law infractions, pudding parables, and a chair named Mildred, there wouldn't be much left to startle you. You'd be wrong. Tonight's event is hosted by a merchant, not a noble, not a monk. A merchant, a wealthy cloth trader whose recent rise has earned him both a manor and a reputation for throwing what the locals call feasts of ambition. Translation: too much money, too little restraint. The moment you arrive, the signs are clear. The torches lining the path are dyed purple, not wrapped in purple cloth. The flames themselves flicker with a violet hue, courtesy of some foul-smelling chemical infusion. Guests murmur admiration while coughing into their sleeves. The garden is filled with mechanical birds that squawk when passed. You try to smile at one. It blinks poorly. Inside, the table is set for 40. Your guest number 39. Not last, thank God, but not far from it. You've been placed between a wine importer from Genoa and a nobleman's daughter who smells like fennel and judgment. The chairs don't have names, yet. The merchant enters in a coat of silver-threaded linen, so shiny it casts reflections onto the ceiling. He raises his goblet immediately. To gold without guilt and guests without envy. That's your cue to drink. You do. The wine is excellent and probably not laced with rosewater. The first course arrives, roasted peacock. Feathers still attached. Pose intact. Eyes painted open with what you sincerely hope is vegetable dye. It's not meant to be eaten. It's meant to be stared at. You do not blink. Then the music starts, and so begins the pie parade. Not pies for eating. These are performance pies, dishes that arrive solely for the drama. One by one they appear, a pastry castle filled with quince smoke, a pie that moves when opened, mechanism unclear, and something that may have once been a live eel wearing a crown. None of it is consumed. You wait, and then comes your personal trial. A knife is presented to you, wrapped in violet silk, unused. Its blade inscribed with a motto in bad Latin, Per cibus gloria. Through food, glory. It's a gift from the host. Everyone sees it. Everyone watches. Because now you're supposed to use it. On something. Gracefully, symbolically. You choose the fruit tart. You cut a slice. Clean, straight, not greedy, and offer it to the noble woman beside you before serving yourself. Applause. Light, but sincere. You exhale. Then the merchant stands and announces that it is time for the gesture of tribute. The what? A servant approaches each guest with a scroll and a feather quill. You are to write a single sentence of tribute to the host. These will be read aloud. You freeze. The Genoese wine importer beside you writes quickly, To the man whose wealth shames emperors. The noblewoman writes, To the peacock who plucked the heavens. You panic. You write, To the host whose bread knew no hunger. It's vague, vaguely reverent, impossibly theological, perfect. The scrolls are collected. They are read. Yours receives a nod. Then the merchant announces the entertainment. Not jesters, not dancers, but a reenactment. Of what? The first goose treaty. You glance at Chapel Hat, who, of course, is here again, somehow seated 2 places ahead of you as if she knew this would happen. She mouths, Told you. The reenactment begins. 2 guests are dressed in goose feather cloaks. One plays a flute. One honks. They perform a symbolic duel, arguing over grain rights before being reconciled by a 3rd guest dressed as a barley sheaf. Everyone claps, you clap. You do not laugh, not out loud. because to laugh would be to imply mockery of the host's family tradition. Yes, apparently the host's ancestors were involved in some infamous agrarian land dispute, now remembered exclusively through goose cosplay. The banquet resumes. Dessert is a sugar sculpture of the merchant himself astride a lion. Someone accidentally bites the lion's ear. They are removed. You do not ask where to. Finally, the last course arrives, a custard shaped like a coin. The message is clear, but before you can take a bite, the merchant raises his hand. He makes a toast to himself. No one blinks. This is expected. He then declares that the final rite of the evening is upon you, the inspection of leftovers. You panic again. You remember what happened last time. You remember the shame of the unshared trencher, the ghost of the uneaten lion pair. You will not fail again. You carefully arrange your plate. Trencher scraped. Bread crust placed neatly. Fruit stem offered to the hound under the table. The merchant strolls behind the chairs, inspecting their remains like a general surveying the battlefield. He pauses at your place, smiles. Balanced, he says, and symbolic. You bow your head slightly. The evening ends. You made it. You navigated the goose treaty, the tribute scrolls, the peacock performance. You wielded a ceremonial knife. You did not eat the bird that blinked. Chapel Hat walks with you to the courtyard. You're improving, she says. Or losing my sense of taste, you reply. She hands you a sugar goose. You deserve this. You take it. Outside, the wind is cool. Your breath hangs in the air like a prayer or an apology. You eat the goose. It tastes like relief. The next banquet doesn't begin with a trumpet or a scroll or even a whisper. It begins with a summons. A square of parchment tucked under your door, smelling faintly of parchment glue and goose wax. The script is tight and unpretentious. Tonight, the manner of Sam Braun. Do not wear red. Do not bring plums. You stare at it for a moment, wondering if this is an invitation or a threat. You wonder if it's both. You've heard of Sam Braun. Everyone has. A half-ruined keep on a hill known for two things: impossibly old cheese and incredibly subtle insults. This is the social Olympic Games, the high court of petty remarks. And tonight, you're going to fail in a whole new way. You arrive before sunset. The manor is chillier than expected. The great hall lit not with torchlight, but beeswax candles set in silver trays. It smells of damp stone and lavender. There are only 12 guests. Every one of them has opinions sharper than their knives. These are the scholars, judges, retired bishops, and duel survivors who gather not for food, but for semantic combat. And the meal? It's merely a pretext. You are seated beside a former abbé who once debated a heretic into madness. His spoon is already poised before you've even adjusted your cloak. Chapel Hat is here too, naturally. Across the table, she's sipping something amber with the expression of a woman ready to correct someone into silence. The first course is humble. Root vegetable stew in a crusty loaf bowl. But no one touches it. They're waiting. For what? A story. The host, a gaunt man with candle wax fingers, begins. It was at the Feast of St. Giles, he says, when my cousin insulted a parsnip so directly that the kitchen staff refused to return. Polite laughter. You smile. You're safe. Until he adds, and what of you, friend? What has been your most edible scandal? All eyes land on you. You are expected to produce a tale of mild embarrassment, laced with wit and culinary metaphor, that will amuse the table without disrupting the social climate. You breathe in. You begin. Well, you say, there was once a trencher and a hat and a goose that may or may not have been offended. Murmurs of interest. And, the host leans in, you deliver the punchline. The hat lived, but the dignity did not. There's a pause, then laughter, actual laughter. Someone to your left clinks their spoon against their goblet. You are now anecdote tier respected. The meal begins. You tear the bread. Diploma sip. So far, so good. But then, oh no, the second course arrives. Stuffed quail. Normally this would be fine. But at Sambron, the quail is sacred. No one's quite sure why. Some say it's a local superstition. Others whisper that a noble once received a prophecy from a roasted quail's bones and won a legal battle because of it. You are handed your plate. You are handed a fork and a tiny wooden mallet. You don't ask questions. You wait. You observe. Others begin eating delicately, cracking the quail bones open with quiet thunks. No knives, no ripping, no chewing with noise. You mimic them. Thunk, crack, diploma bite. You're doing it, and then someone coughs. Not an ordinary cough, a theatrical cough. It comes from the older woman to your right. She dabs her mouth with her napkin. Forgive me, she says, but was that a bone on the wrong plate? Your heart freezes. You look down. In your careful rhythm, one of your cracked quail bones has rolled slightly, just slightly, onto her side of the trencher. You mutter an apology. She waves it off. Of course, she says. Easy mistake. The last guest who did that was illiterate. You are not meant to respond. You simply nod. You eat slower now. The next course is conversation. Yes, actual conversation as a course. There is a pause in food, a moment in which you are expected to contribute a brief philosophical observation related to dining, hierarchy, or ecclesiastical cheese practices. You panic. But Chapel Hat gives you the smallest of smirks across the table. A cue. You raise your goblet. A wise man once said, "Tell me how one carves a roast, and I'll tell you how they govern a kingdom." Silence. Then the host. Clever. Misquoted, but clever. Success. You relax. A little. The final dish appears. A custard dome surrounded by candied petals, with a wafer on top inscribed in edible ink. Yours says, "We endure." You hope that's a compliment. As everyone digs in, the host announces the evening's final entertainment, the game of misheard verses. Each guest is handed a slip of parchment with a slightly altered line from a well-known medieval poem or hymn. You are to read it aloud, dramatically but slightly incorrectly. Others must guess the original. If they laugh, you did it right. If no one laughs, you failed. Your turn comes. You stand, you clear your throat, and you read. One that April with his showers suit did soak my cheese and drown my goat. A beat, laughter, actual laughter. Someone claps. Even the abbé chuckles into his spoon. You sit. You've passed the test. When the meal ends, the host stands. He raises his hands in blessing or mockery. It's unclear. This guest, he says, gesturing to you, may return. A high honor. You bow. And as you leave, Chapel Hat joins you at the door. That cheese line, she says, was excellent. I improvised. She pauses. I'm impressed. You pause. Does that mean I finally understand the rules? She smiles. Number, but you understand the people who pretend to. And that, perhaps, is enough. Tonight there are no invitations, no scrolls, no heralds with decorative horns. Tonight you are simply led. A knock at your chamber door just after dusk. A servant with a candle. The Duchess requests your presence. No name, no details. You're not sure which Duchess. There are 3 in the region. One collects ivory spoons. One claims to speak with saints through tapestry. The third once dueled a goat and lost. You follow the servant anyway. He leads you to a small carriage. You travel in silence. And when the doors open, you step into the strangest banquet you've seen yet. There are only 5 guests. The room is round, the ceiling low. A fire crackles in a hearth sculpted like a lion yawning. The table is bare, no cloth, no cutlery, just bread. 5 loaves, 1 per guest. That's it. The Duchess, whichever one this is, sits already at the head. She's not wearing a crown, not even a head wrap, just a silver comb in her braid and an expression that says, "I know what you forgot yesterday." You nod. She gestures to your seat. You sit. The bread is warm. The room is not. This, she says, is a banquet of silence. Your stomach drops. You've heard of these. Monastic-inspired meals where nothing is spoken. Every gesture must be precise. Every bite must be mindful, and every crumb tracked like a confession. You glance around. The others already have their hands resting palms up on either side of their loaves. You follow suit. A bell rings, tiny, silver, from nowhere. You begin. You break the bread, not tear. Break. That matters. You chew slowly. This isn't about hunger, it's about control. No eye contact, no fidgeting, and most important of all, no speaking. You nearly forget and mutter, as you bite into a honeyed corner. One of the guests glances sharply in your direction. You close your mouth, tight. Across the table, a steward in gray robes brings the second course. Lentils, plain, earthy, served in shallow wooden bowls. No spoons. You must scoop with the crust of your bread or your fingers. You choose the bread. It's more elegant. Halfway through, someone sneezes. They do it politely into a napkin, without noise. Still, the Duchess narrows her eyes as if she's just caught a lie being whispered by a carrot. The third course is wine, but not to drink. It is poured into shallow clay dishes, and you are expected to inhale. Yes, you hold the bowl under your nose, breathe in the bouquet, spiced, mulled, slightly medicinal, and place it back down without tasting. Why? Because this is a ritual of abstinence in proximity. You must sit with your temptation and not give in. You've been to banquets where wine was a flood. Here it's a ghost. The silence begins to stretch, not uncomfortably but tightly, like a harp string just before it snaps. Then a bell again. The final course, apples and ash. The apple is halved. The ash, a soft dusting of burned rosemary, rests atop. Symbolism abounds. Something about transience, decay, possibly your social standing if you chew too loudly. You chew quietly. The Duchess rises. Still silent, she circles the table, stops behind each guest. At your chair, she pauses. You wait. Then she taps your shoulder once and continues. The meal is over. You do not rise until she does. You do not speak until you are outside. When you step into the night air, you feel lighter. Because here, you didn't fail. You didn't offend the fish, the fruit, or the god of overcomplicated silverware. You did not laugh at a pie. You did not speak out of turn. You survived. But as you walk back toward your chambers, Chapel Hat joins you. You look haunted, she says. Bread-only meals will do that. She laughs. You know what comes next, don't you? No, you sigh. Please don't tell me there's more. There's one. You stop. She tilts her head. The royal banquet. Your stomach drops. The real one? She nods. High table, heralds, the bishop of cheese, the 4 bread judges, even the one who doesn't speak. You look up at the stars, you count your breath. You whisper, I'll die. She smirks. Probably, but you'll do it in velvet. and with that she vanishes down the corridor. You continue walking. You reach your chamber. You see a letter on your pillow. No seal, no name, just one sentence. You are summoned. You awaken on the morning of the royal banquet as if summoned by divine anxiety. Your dreams were a swirl of jellied meats and sarcastic forks, and when you open your eyes, you're already halfway to panicking about which napkin folds mean, "I surrender," and which ones mean, "Start the fish riot." The letter is still on your pillow. You reread it as if hoping the ink has changed. You are summoned. No details, no time, just inevitability. This is the high table, the last stage, the summit, the Everest of edible etiquette. You dress carefully, not too opulent. You are not royalty, not too humble. You are not livestock. You settle on dark green wool, gold trim, modest buttons. You wear a signet ring you borrowed from a librarian. It doesn't open any doors, but it whispers reliably obscure nobility. Chapel Hat arrives at your door. Her hat tonight is spectacular. A full tower of silk with a halo of embroidered daisies and what might be a tiny windmill. "You'll do fine," she says. "I'll perish." She nods. Quietly, though. The royal hall is beyond anything you've seen. Massive tapestries, each one the size of a confession. Candles taller than children. Pewter chandeliers suspended like frozen chaos. And down the length of the great stone floor, one long, gleaming table. At its head, the queen. To her left, the Bishop of Cheese, recognizable by his cheddar-colored robes and solemn dairy medallion. To her right, a small man in brown robes, the silent bread judge. He has not spoken in 19 years. His nods have sent people into exile. You are seated 12 places down, far from the queen, but not far enough to relax. You glance at the table. Each setting is identical. 3 knives, 2 spoons, 1 fork that looks slightly suspicious, and a ceramic spoon labeled possibly decorative. You sit, you breathe. The feast begins with silence. And then, a single drumbeat, doom. The doors open. The first course is carried in by 4 people. A pie the size of a goat, wrapped in vine leaves and crowned with roasted figs. You don't blink. You don't sigh. You don't say, "That looks like it could declare war." Because it could. This pie, you know, is political. It's carved into the shape of a castle, with banners, one of which might be the Queen's rival's colors, subtly inverted. This is a message. You look at Chapel Hat. She does not move. No one touches the pie. Instead, servants slice it evenly and distribute portions. You eat exactly 2 bites. To eat less is ungrateful. To eat more is suspicious. The next course is herb wine. You sip slowly, even though it tastes like a wizard's cough remedy. The queen raises a goblet. Everyone follows. She makes no toast, just a gesture. That gesture means the riddles begin. A herald appears, his voice sharp and clean. He reads, "What speaks only when broken, yet tells no lie." A murmur passes through the hall. You know this one. You know it too fast. Your mind screams, "An egg!" But you hesitate, because no one answers immediately at a royal banquet. Too quick means show off. Too slow means fool. You wait, then raise your hand. You speak, calmly. "An egg!" The queen smiles faintly. The bread judge nods once. You are still alive. The next riddle is not for you. You eat the lentils quietly. Someone answers a bell when the answer is regret. They are gently escorted out, not arrested, just reclassified. You drink, you breathe. Then the fish course arrives. But this time it's interactive. You're handed a tray of raw herbs and pickled things and told to assemble your own accompaniment to the trout. It's a test of taste, balance, instinct. You panic. But you recall something the Viscount said once about lemon balm and modesty. You choose wisely. Your dish is acceptable. The bread judge takes no action. The cheese arrives, not in slices, not on trays, but in a parade. Each cheese is announced, its name, its age, its mood. This, the herald intones, is Blancheval. She is sharp this month. You are handed a wedge, you nod solemnly. Then the queen speaks, just once. She says, "Let them explain." You freeze. The steward points at you. You're to explain your relationship to the cheese. You take a deep breath. You say, "Blancheval has often judged me, but I've learned to respect her silence." A beat, a soft chuckle from the bishop. You've passed. The final course is a wafer, one per guest, on each a message. Yours reads, you listened, you close your eyes, you exhale, and then you are handed a single sprig of thyme. This is the royal symbol of survival. You tuck it into your cloak. You bow. You do not cheer. No one cheers at the royal table. But as the queen stands, the bread judge lifts a single crumb and lets it fall. This means it is done. You leave the hall. Outside, Chapel Hat is already waiting. "You didn't drop anything," she says. "I came close." "You always do." You walk together in silence. Then she asks, "Would you do it again?" You pause. "I might, if the cheese is right." She smiles. In the distance, a rooster crows for no reason. The stars blink like tiny breadcrumbs on the night sky. You survived. You feasted. You listened. And tomorrow you'll go back to eating alone, in peace, with your elbows on the table and your spoon in the soup. But for tonight, you remember every bite, every pause, every nod, and you smile. Because you made it. The candles are low now. The feast has long ended. The plates have been cleared. The trenchers dried. The whispers faded to the corners of your memory. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, the world carries on. Carriages rolling, dogs barking, bakers yawning over tomorrow's crust. But in here, it's just you. You're not holding a goblet. No fork rests in your hand. There is no riddling herald or judging loaf or ceremonial pigeon pie. Just the quiet weight of a full story folded into your chest like a napkin, pressed and gently set aside. Breathe in. You made it through. You arrived scrubbed and eager. You were seated too high, sliced too soon, sniffed too loudly. You disrespected bread, offended a duck, elbowed the hierarchy. You panicked at a pie, feared the cheese, and mistook a symbolic wafer for dessert. And yet, somehow, you were invited again. Again and again, you returned. You listened. You learned. You laughed, only at the right times eventually. You nodded when the nod was due. And when handed a fork that looked like a test, you held it like a torch. Now you're not worried about where to place your hands or how to carve a compliment into a slice of lamprey. You're just here, in the soft dark, full of strange lessons and stranger meals. So let your thoughts drift. Let your memories crumble like a well-used trencher. Let the chairs fade. Let the candle gutter. Let the bread forgive you. The feast is done. You were part of it, and now you rest. Because even the most careful guest deserves to sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.